My breath grew shallow. An unfamiliar hand on the comforter was wrapped around my waist, and I just lay there listening to his breathing, not saying a word. This person, this man, he isn't my husband. So why was I doing this with him in the pre-dawn hours? Why hadn't I been able to refuse this touch? It all started just a few days earlier at 3:30 a.m. A jarring sound, a loud, insistent clamor pressed down on my chest and woke me up. In our cold interior hallway apartment building, maybe a high-rise in New York or Chicago, even the winter wind seemed to creep through the walls. But this sound wasn't the wind. It was the screech of metal dragging against the floor, as if something heavy was being pulled. I opened the living room window without turning on the light, but outside everything was silent. Thinking I'd imagined it, I pulled the comforter back over my head. But then a door slammed shut with a distinct sharp bang. My heart pounded. I dragged my slippers down the hallway to the front door. I left the living room dark. I used a fingertip to quietly press the door lock switch and ease the door open. I only peeked out halfway, but a sudden rush of cold air immediately hit my waist. Down the hall at the end of the corridor, the door to the top-floor neighbor's apartment was ajar, rattling slightly. The floor around it was a mess, scattered with discarded scraps of paper and crumpled tissues, as if someone had tossed them out. It was strange. That door was always securely locked, and I hardly ever saw anyone go in or out of that unit. Why is that door open at this hour? My feet slowly started moving in that direction. A paper scrap brushed against my instep, and my eyes caught a glimpse of a faint, blurry face drawn on it. It was a small cutout advertisement, perhaps from a newspaper, showing a woman's face and a telephone number printed in bold numbers. That's when it happened. I sensed a slow movement from inside the open apartment. Holding my breath, I peered through the crack in the door, and the eyes of someone sitting at the kitchen table in the center of the living room met mine exactly. My mind went numb. The person was smoking a cigarette under the low light, and his gaze, a blank stare into space, seemed to be both staring straight at me and not seeing me at all. I couldn't tear my eyes away. The living room was in disarray. The empty walls had no curtains, just a man sitting at a table. A very long, lonely shadow was cast over his shoulder. I didn't know his name then. But strangely, I stood there unable to close the door. Maybe it was because the man's eyes were colder than the floor of the chilling hallway. Or perhaps that was the exact moment something inside of me started to break. Just like that at 4 a.m., an encounter stranger than the strange noise began. I drew a breath in, then slowly let it out. Until just a moment ago, I could have turned back, but the instant our eyes met, my feet froze. Carefully, one step, then another. As if someone had given me permission, I nudged my toe across the threshold into the open doorway. Without a word, without a sound, the door slowly closed behind me. The living room was heavy with the smell of cigarette smoke and cold air. The only furniture was a dining table and 2 chairs. The walls were bare, and the glass sliding door to the balcony was wide open, looking intensely blue in the night. The man was still sitting at the table. He was looking directly at me, cupping a coffee mug with both hands, a gesture that felt unfamiliar yet strangely intimate. "Are you okay?" His lips moved, but his voice was as light as a whisper. I just gave a slight nod. The man picked up a thermos placed next to his knee, quietly took out a second mug, and began making instant coffee. I only started breathing again amid the soft spreading aroma of the coffee. On the floor were scattered paper scraps, plastic bags, and something that looked like an unopened gift box rolling near my feet. His coffee mug was placed in front of me first. "My wife's at her parents' house. Not today." His words sounded like a permission, a confirmation that it was okay for me to be here now. I sat down, hands folded in my lap, and picked up the coffee. He continued the conversation. "We're having a baby, but my mother's disappointed. It's a girl." His fingers were trembling slightly, and his eyes occasionally drifted out the window in a vacant stare. He continued slowly. "She says since I'm the last direct male descendant, it has to be a boy. My wife barely talks to me these days, won't even look me in the eye. It's gotten worse since she got pregnant." Something inside me began to warm up. I turned slightly toward him. "That's exactly when you need to take her side the most. A woman carrying a baby is the most insecure person in the world." The words tumbled out, sounding like the solace I had long wished my own husband would offer me. The man's eyes settled on my face. It was a gaze sharper than tension or tenderness. I felt it track down my neck over my shoulder and stop over my chest. I didn't know what else to say, and he seemed unsure of what to say next either. But that silence filled the space between us more intensely than a sip of coffee. I put my cup down and lowered my head slightly. His eyes seemed to look beyond me, focused on something else. I couldn't tell if he was looking at me or the loneliness I carried behind me. But it was strange. The room was empty, yet it felt suffocatingly full. Was this what it felt like for my body to grow cold? I rubbed my arms, but it didn't help. I was sitting in my neighbor's living room drinking warm coffee, yet I felt colder inside. I still didn't know his name was Ethan at that moment. Just a man across the table, someone's husband, someone's son, sitting there as if he were no one at all. My mother said the same thing again this morning, that if it's a girl, the family line will end. When he smiled faintly as he said it, I don't know why, but my own lips began to tremble, sensing the tears hidden in his words. That's not the baby's fault, and it's not your fault either. I probably shouldn't say this, but there are plenty of women who have sons and still have to deal with subtle judgment their entire lives. Those words were for me too. Early in my marriage, my in-laws had high expectations. Their eyes would question me if I looked even a little tired. Then, several years passed without a child, and no one asked anymore that silence was more terrifying. It's really bad when the connection between a couple breaks. At my words, he slowly raised his head. A few days ago, my wife pushed my hand away, told me not to come near her. Unable to respond, I just gripped my hands, which were folded in my lap. When people get lonely, they become a shadow that someone wants to avoid, or a swamp that someone wants to fall into. I just thought, I wish someone would just let me drown. When he said that, the emptiness inside me suddenly started to shake and rattle. Perhaps comforting someone isn't about holding their hand, but about revealing how lonely you are first. I've hardly looked anyone in the eye like this since I got married. He spoke looking at me, and I didn't avoid his gaze. It was truly strange. We weren't exchanging warm words yet, the room was growing hotter. His eyes lingered on an area slightly below my face, and the moment I realized it, my hand unconsciously pulled my skirt to cover my knees. It was a fleeting moment, but I felt it. He was tracking my movement. His breathing had subtly changed. That's when it happened. Breaking the silence, my coffee spoon, which had slid under the table, clattered to the floor. As I cautiously bent down with sweaty fingertips to pick it up, his hand reached the spoon first. Our hands brushed. I held my breath. He remained silent. But in that stillness, the certainty that we both knew something spread between us like a hot wave. I ran my fingertips lightly over the spot where our hands had touched. Though I'd only just picked up a spoon, my heart was beating unusually fast. He was the first to look away, but that brief contact had left an irrevocable warmth. I had lived as only someone's wife and someone's daughter-in-law. To be precise, I had existed without the person me only as the possession of others. To me, this quiet moment felt unbearably strange and at the same time strangely familiar. That's how it was back then, I murmured as if talking to myself. Whenever my mother-in-law was giving me a hard time, my husband would always pretend to be asleep. It would have hurt less if he had just been indifferent, but the sight of him turning his back to the headboard, knowing exactly what was happening, was more painful. He listened quietly. He didn't impose any agenda or emotion onto my words, and perhaps that was even more dangerous. I just wanted one person to take my side, to listen to the end of what I had to say. He silently took another sip from his coffee cup. The steam slowly drifted from his lips, and his breath felt warm as if it had reached my cheek across the table. It felt as though he was answering me with his breath, not words. His eyes seemed to look even deeper into me than before. Sarah. At the sudden mention of my name, my eyes widened. He couldn't have known my name. He must have seen the nameplate next to the doorbell. But strangely, my entire body stiffened at that single word. His gaze slowly moved down my shoulder and lower. I gathered my knees tightly and brought the coffee cup to my lips, but my mouth stopped before it touched the rim. He had been watching me for too long. Instead of feeling that he was being rude, the feeling that I didn't want to avoid his gaze came first. The reason I was here wasn't curiosity. Perhaps I too was simply thirsty for loneliness. His eyes were no longer quiet. His stare was plunging directly into somewhere deep inside me. He clearly hadn't done anything, but I was already feeling a cool tension between my legs. This was the first man who had penetrated me so deeply with just his breath and gaze without ever touching my skin. I shifted my position. The dining chair made a small creaking sound, and the air around us deepened strangely with that noise. His gaze followed that small sound. He didn't miss the slight rise of my skirt hem as it fell over my knees, nor my urgent attempt to cover it with my hand. I deliberately turned my gaze toward the window. Outside, it was still pre-dawn, a deep quiet and therefore more dangerous hour. "You heard the noise earlier, right?" he asked. I quietly nodded. My mother came by again. About it being a girl. As soon as she heard, she started shouting and grabbed my wife, trying to force her to have an abortion. He couldn't finish the sentence. He closed his eyes, picked up the mug, but couldn't drink. Only his lips were moistened. My wife just got dressed and left without a word. Now I understood. The frantic noises in the early morning, the door slamming, the elevator opening, the tissues and paper scraps scattered in the hall. They were fragments of emotions that had erupted from this apartment. I slowly looked at the cup placed in front of him. You've endured too much. He leaned slightly toward me. When we first got married, it was good. Eating together, going grocery shopping, but after she got pregnant, my wife gradually pulled away and my mother moved closer. She was so persistent. Even though it's my child, I couldn't say anything. The self-loathing contained in his words made him seem more dangerous. I looked at him silently. His fingers trembled slightly as he held the cup, and his gaze moved toward my fingertips, my knee, and the hem of my skirt. I saw you a few days ago, Sarah. In the hallway. Your face was catching the sunlight, and you were smiling while wearing those yellow rubber gloves. In that moment, I couldn't bear it, he confessed. I don't know how many times I thought about that scene alone that night. His breathing changed. The air in the room grew heavy, slowly tightening around us. I folded my hands on my knees, and he quietly stared at my fingertips. I can't stop thinking about you since that day, Sarah. I realized for the first time that your smile, your light, is nowhere in my life right now. He sighed without speaking. The breath was low and long as if it reached my collarbone. I parted my lips slightly, then closed them. I didn't know what to say. Just sitting there, neither avoiding nor meeting his gaze, the line between us was already blurring. His eyes were quiet, yet they clearly held an unquenched thirst. Perhaps the same was true for me. My heart was pounding in that windless living room. The desire not to collapse and the desperate wish for someone to call my name were shaking precariously on a thin wire. And then his lips opened again. This is very dangerous now. The words sounded like a confession to me and a warning to himself. My legs, hidden beneath the table, trembled slightly. I shifted my position to conceal it. As I slightly tugged the hem of my skirt to cover my knees, his gaze followed the movement clearly. There was no more hesitation in his eyes. They were like a quiet, burning fire. Our eyes met silently, attention maintained only by our breath with lips closed. In that moment, I felt a thin membrane tear inside me. He didn't stand up and he didn't reach out. But I knew. His whole body was enduring this moment, and I too had become part of that waiting. I picked up the cup. Even that small action felt intensely sexual, because the unyielding intensity of his gaze continued through the glass rim as it met my lips. With every exhale, his eyes followed the line of my neck. My shadow cast over the table slowly approached his hand, and he didn't miss even the shadow. I shouldn't be doing this. The words that escaped my mouth were closer to a prayer than a statement. But he didn't answer. He was just waiting for me to break right there. I twisted my body and stood up from the chair. Even the sensation of my skirt hem brushing against my legs felt sensitive. The moment I started to walk, he slowly rose from his chair too. One step, then another. The distance remained, but the air was already close. I inhaled sharply when he silently raised one hand near my shoulder. His fingertips didn't touch my body, but the mere sense of his presence sent a current down my spine. I slowly raised my head and our eyes met. They were filled with a deep, long-buried loneliness, more profound than lust. I don't remember who moved first. We were suddenly standing side by side, silently looking in the same direction, and we stopped in front of the bedroom door at the end of the living room. Neither of us spoke until his hand reached the doorknob. All the words had already been exchanged through our eyes and breath. The hand that opened the door was firm. If my fingertips had trembled even a little, the door would have closed again. But it opened very gently, very naturally. The bedroom was small. The only furnishings were a mattress, 2 pillows, and an unlit standing lamp. There was no warmth inside, but my body was intensely heated. The sound of the door closing was quiet, as if someone had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. We stood facing each other. No words were needed in this space. He slowly approached, and I did not back away. It was a mutual pull. Neither of us could claim to have initiated it. Fingertips touched first. It wasn't intentional, but his hand rested precisely on my chest as the fabric of my top rode up and his breath lowered to my neckline. I closed my eyes not to avoid him, but because I wanted to receive this sensation more slowly. I no longer remember how many times our lips met and separated, or how my clothes fell from my shoulder, or when my back arched over the comforter. The breaths were long and the silence was hot. It wasn't once. I couldn't count how many times. He quietly called my name and I understood everything without that single word. Dizziness and emptiness washed over me simultaneously, but before that, something long empty inside me was being filled. I didn't utter the word love in that moment. What we shared was a communion more instinctive than love, and more lonely than lust, and my body knew how dangerous it was. Outside the window, dawn was breaking. We were silent until the faint light filtering through the window of the curtainless bedroom touched the edge of the pillow. I quietly got up. As I picked up my damp underwear, I saw him, his back to me, catching his breath. I didn't say anything, and there was nothing that needed to be said. I simply pressed my lips together, once smoothed the creases from my shirt, and walked out to the living room. On the table were the 2 cooling coffee cups, the spilled spoon, and the chairs exactly where we had sat when our eyes first met. Everything was the same, yet everything had changed. I quietly opened the front door, and only then did the chill hit me. Before I closed the door, he said in a low voice from behind me, "It's okay." That short phrase was not comfort or forgiveness. It was just a confirmation that he had shared the same sin as me. I didn't answer. Closing the door, I looked at the pale back of my hand. I remembered too clearly what that hand had touched and where it had been in the last few hours. Instead of my reflection in the unmirrored hallway, the heavy ache in my chest was more distinct. My husband's face flashed into my mind. Is he awake yet? Did he drink water without suspicion, noticing my absence? Did he throw off the covers and turn on the news as usual? My steps toward my apartment were heavy. The pre-dawn air was cold, but my body had not yet cooled down. With every exhale, I felt the receding warmth of his body, and I was more afraid of myself, the part that wished the sensation wouldn't disappear. I knew I couldn't take back this morning. When I opened my apartment door, the house was filled with a lukewarm silence instead of warm air. The lights were off, but I heard a small sound from the kitchen. My husband was already awake. The hand pouring water into his travel mug paused, and he turned around. "Where have you been?" I didn't hesitate for a second. "Just wanted some fresh air," I replied casually, but my voice trembled slightly. My husband simply nodded, capped the mug, and turned back toward the dining table. His back felt strangely distant. The same clothes he wore every day, the same movements. Yet why did he feel so remote? He sat down silently, turned on his phone, and scrolled through the news. I quietly took off my shoes and went into the bedroom. I slipped under the covers, but the chill wouldn't go away. Closing my eyes, the air of the bedroom where I had felt his warmth, his gaze, and his breathing just a while ago flooded back irresistible. My husband called out asking something, but I didn't answer. I pulled the comforter up to my face and just curled up. I was not ready to step back into the ordinary routine of boiling baking, setting out spoons, and picking up chopsticks. The room I had just left felt too real, and this room felt like a distant dream. My husband didn't ask any more questions. I don't know if I was grateful for the silence or tormented by it, but I knew. Even though my body was in the same space as my husband, my mind was still wandering elsewhere. The scent of him, still faintly lingering between my thighs, slowly tightened its grip on me. Guilt filled me up to my throat, and its weight was not light. But what was more frightening was the voice inside me that even in this moment wanted to go back somehow. I felt a presence behind me. I curled up further under the covers. I couldn't handle any contact right now, but a hand gently rested on the comforter, cold. My husband's voice was low, and there was no apology or tenderness in it. His hand simply moved slowly down my waist, as if it were the start of a familiar day. I didn't move. I neither stopped nor avoided the hand. The scent of soap came from his body as he slid under the covers, a completely different, familiar, and controlled warmth. "I love you," my husband whispered. I closed my eyes. His breath on my neck was soft, and even when his fingertips covered me beneath my underwear, there was nothing rough about it. He said he loved me, and I did not reply. I only slightly lifted my hips to follow his movement. My body was reacting, but my mind was sinking into deeper confusion. My husband's touch was familiar, but my heart kept fluttering for someone unfamiliar. When my husband entered me, I was thinking of someone else's eyes. The moment I had been tangled with a different breath, a different warmth on a different comforter. My skin was accepting my husband, but inside I was collapsing. I bit my lip. Not to prevent making a sound, but because I was afraid the strange pleasure and guilt swelling within me would escape. The morning sun was growing brighter, and the shadow that fell over me grew longer. My husband held me tightly, catching his breath. I opened my eyes. Staring at the ceiling, I thought, can I go back? Or do I even want to go back? Without anyone knowing, I collapsed once more that morning. That morning, she didn't just confront a neighbor or loneliness. She actually confronted the unfamiliar emotions and desires hidden within herself. The wish to be loved, the thirst to be truly seen by someone, all of it had seeped through a brief crack. Moments of weakness come to everyone in life. This story is the record of a woman who faced her own heart for the first time amidst that vulnerability. If any of you have listened to this long story to the end, please leave a comment saying I listened. That single word is a great encouragement for me to continue the next story. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video too. Thank you.